Resume. 12 years ago, I was an intern at a large organization in New York, where I became friends with a colleague. During the internship, we grew close, but our relationship was always platonic, with no romantic involvement. After a happy hour, she tried to kiss me, but in that moment, I pulled away when I remembered my girlfriend. From then on, our friendship became awkward. She started acting distant, and eventually, she blocked me and went back to. Recently, I discovered that she became a successful author. While reading one of her books, I realized that the main male character was clearly based on me, portraying me as a selfish and manipulative villain. I was completely shocked and confused by how I was represented. 12 years ago, I interned at a well-known company in NYC. Now, I discovered I'm the villain in a best-selling novel. 12 years ago, I was an intern at a very large and well-known organization in New York. It was a prestigious place, attracting interns from all over the world, intelligent, ambitious, and interesting people. At the time, I was in a long-distance relationship with my then-girlfriend, who is now my wife and the mother of our 2 children. Among the other interns, there was a girl I got along very well with. We had a great platonic relationship, having lunch together, talking about life, books, and our aspirations. There was never any flirting, at least on my part, just what I thought was a genuine friendship. One day, a group of us went to our usual post-work bar for happy hour. It was the kind of place where we'd relax, complain about our bosses, and talk about our plans for the future. That night, after a few drinks, she and I ended up in a one-on-one conversation, away from the group. She suddenly leaned in and tried to kiss me. For a brief moment, I almost went along with it. But then, my girlfriend's face appeared in my mind. That small moment of clarity saved me. I pulled away. Things got awkward quickly. She laughed it off, but after that night, everything changed. She started acting distant, making sarcastic comments in group settings, and eventually, we barely spoke. When the internship ended, she went back to her home country. She even blocked me on Facebook, and since we weren't connected anywhere else, that was the last time I heard from her. 2 weeks ago, I was casually browsing Twitter/X when I came across an article from a well-known newspaper. The headline caught my attention, but what really shocked me was the photo, her face, featured prominently. It turns out she had become a big name in the literary world, publishing 5 fiction books and even winning some major awards. Curious, I started researching her work. One book, in particular, stood out. It had an impressive cover with a New York theme, and the description mentioned a young author working at a prestigious organization in NYC. It sounded intriguing, so I decided to buy it on my iPad. Big mistake. On the 3rd page, she introduces a terrible, selfish guy. One with the same haircut as mine, the same sense of fashion, and, crucially, from the same city as me. By the end of page 4, she mentions my name. And believe me, my name is not common. I read the entire book in one sitting. She had written a whole novel where I was the antagonist. And not just any antagonist, the worst person in the protagonist's life. She twisted every little thing I had ever said or done, turning me into this deceitful and manipulative villain who betrayed her, crushed her dreams, and was basically the personification of everything wrong with men. I don't even know how to feel. On one hand, I think I made an impression. On the other, what the hell? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Kevin the Culinary Artist. Some basic information. My wife and I love cooking. It's one of our favorite hobbies. We cook together at least once a week and usually make enough to have leftovers. We have very few microwave meals at home. Enter Kevin. Kevin is a friend of a friend I knew casually about 4 years ago. He had recently lost his job, couldn't afford to pay for his apartment, and needed a place to stay while he got back on his feet. Feeling generous, my wife and I offered him our guest room for a few weeks. On his first day with us, my wife and I made a meal together for all of us. Kevin got inspired by our lifestyle and said, "Oh yes, I also love cooking. Let me make breakfast for you tomorrow." This was the start of a kitchen disaster. Kevin tried to make fried eggs by putting a 20 centimeters frying pan on the highest possible heat. The flames were actively burning the plastic handle. My house smelled like burnt plastic for days. Kevin noticed the smell the next day and insisted that my dog had pooped somewhere in the house. Kevin needed to be taught not to keep his fingers in the way of a knife. Somehow, He consistently kept the flat side of the vegetables facing up while chopping. We quickly stopped letting him cut anything. Kevin couldn't understand the concept of preheating. Kevin thought the ground beef in my fridge was pasta. Kevin was vehemently against leaving the fridge door open for any reason. He said my milk would spoil because I left the door open for 3 minutes while I was restocking after coming back from the grocery store. When my wife and I were at work, Kevin tried to grill chicken using pre-seasoned chicken breasts and followed a YouTube tutorial, +1 for effort. He put the chicken directly on my gas stove because he thought it was the same as a grill. Kevin kept suggesting that our little herb garden would be great for growing marijuana. I don't know much about marijuana, but I'm pretty sure you can't grow it in a tiny pot like that. I instructed Kevin to make cookies with pre-made dough. We watched TV while we waited. When the timer went off, I told him to take the cookies out. He went back to the living room and said, "I'll let it cool." He tried to take the pan with his bare hands and left it in the hot oven to cool. I told Kevin that putting an egg in the microwave would make it explode. This excited him. While I was at work, he put an egg in the microwave. It exploded. All the while, he pretended to know what he was doing and was just double-checking with his questions. This lasted about 5 days. Basically, we didn't let him in the kitchen after that point. After he left our house, we found out he was in a long-term relationship where his girlfriend did all the cooking and meal prep. What I don't understand is why he felt the need to lie. If he had said, "I don't know much about cooking, but it looks fun and I'd love to join you," we wouldn't have had a problem. Some bonus Kevinisms. Kevin kept asking if he could eat our share of the leftovers. We usually made enough food for 3 people while he was staying with us. This wasn't stupid, just rude. Kevin called all streaming services Netflix. For example, Game of Thrones is on Netflix on HBO Max. Spoiled family wants to harass the neighbors during the holidays, but finds karma. So, this isn't a story about an individual causing trouble, but rather about a family who decided that acting as a public nuisance was the thing to do, until it ended up costing them dearly. To give some context, my sister shared this story with me and the rest of the family a week ago during our holiday gathering. Some of our other siblings knew something about it, and she was kind enough to detail the results of what happened. To set the scene, one of my older sisters is super sociable. We live in a small enough town that there's hardly anyone she doesn't know. However, to manage this, she keeps her home life very separate from her social life. It's just her husband, and 2 black Labradors. She lives a bit outside of town, with only a few local neighbors. Her other neighbors are cabin owners who are usually not around. As she says, it's a nice, quiet place where someone can do whatever they want. The problem involves the cabin right next door. The story starts in the spring of 2023. A family of 5 showed up at the cabin. At first, my sister said it wasn't a big deal. She said they just seemed like typical suburban folks. 2 parents, 3 kids. The problems began when my brother-in-law started finding trash in the yard, about a week later. Things like candy wrappers, popsicle wrappers, the kind of stuff you find in a gas station cooler. Keep in mind that my brother-in-law and sister take great pride in their clean yard. The dogs are very well behaved, and part of that is having a safe space for them to play. So, when my brother-in-law found the trash, he wasn't happy. At first, he didn't know who was doing it until he noticed 2 boys on bikes riding down the street. They were eating things and casually tossing trash as they went. He first went to the closest local neighbor. They're a retired elderly couple, and he asked them about the trash. They explained that they had seen the boys and occasionally an older girl with food walking down the street tossing things into the ditch. So, my brother-in-law, satisfied with this brief investigation, decided to talk to the source. He went to the cabin in question and knocked. A guy, probably about 10 years younger, opened the door. My brother-in-law described him as a kind of used car salesman. Let's call this guy Kevin, for the sake of the theme. My brother-in-law kindly mentioned the trash and explained that they had dogs, and out of concern that they might pick up something that could make them sick, he asked that the kids not throw trash around the neighborhood. This guy tried to argue, insisting that my brother-in-law should just keep the dogs on a leash and that it wasn't his fault what happened, or something like that. Before my brother-in-law could say anything, Kevin slammed the door, and the last thing my brother-in-law heard from the other side was laughter and the word "hick" being used. Now, my brother-in-law is surprisingly calm. He knows when to pick a fight, so he chose to stay calm. That night, He explained what happened to my sister after she came home from work. She wanted to do something about them, but my brother-in-law calmed her down. Things started to get a little more interesting a few days later when my brother-in-law began to notice a lot more trash in his yard, further in. That is, there was no way it could have gotten there unless it was thrown intentionally. So, my brother-in-law decided to talk to them again. He went over, knocked, and found Kevin convinced again. According to my sister, he scolded my brother-in-law, saying it wasn't something they cared about and that they had seen his dogs off-leash, plus that my brother-in-law and sister were just a bunch of hicks. So, after getting a door slammed in his face, my brother-in-law started thinking of ways to deal with this problem. But Kevin and his wife, Karen, tried to get ahead of him because of what had happened. The next day, my sister came home and there was a police officer there. My sister knew the officer, and they sat down. The officer said they received a call about a dog attack. My sister had to laugh at that.
Why?
Because my sister takes the dogs with her every day to work. She works as a scheduling coordinator/secretary at a small private landscaping company. Unless my brother-in-law is off, the dogs are with her. The report was from earlier that day, when no one would have been home. After confirming with my sister that no, the dogs didn't run home, attack any kids, and return, and after explaining the issues with the people at the cabin, the officer decided to talk more with the people who made the call. Later, my sister found out that they only received a warning, but the officer directly told them that they were visitors, and disturbing the residents wasn't a good idea. Note that I'm not sure what she meant by that. Those were her words, not mine. So, for a few months, things calmed down. It seemed like the argument was over. Until our entitled tourists started throwing parties. Now, the parties weren't loud, they seemed civilized, but 2 weeks after the party started, a trash bag was thrown into my sister's yard. My sister found it while she was on the deck. It was quite early in the morning, near the entrance. She wasn't sure what had happened, so she moved it to a trash can and waited for my brother-in-law. She told him what she found, and he decided to start installing trail cameras. He had some leftovers from his hunting days, thinking that if it was Kevin and his family or some stranger, at least they would know soon. After installing them, it didn't take long. He recorded 2 very good videos of one of the 2 boys and then their daughter throwing trash in the yard. My brother-in-law called the police and let them see what he had recorded on video. They couldn't catch them for the trash before that, but they received 2 substantial fines for littering. My sister thinks the total fines must have come close to $550. After that, you would think this group of entitled tourists would try to get revenge, but as the season was coming to an end, they must have decided to cut their losses because they left. One day and poof. It turns out they had their own plans. My sister said it was good to get rid of them, and during the winter, things were as quiet as they normally would be. Things didn't stay that way. You would think people would learn or at least grow up a little, but my sister said that last spring they showed up again. This time, as if they were ready for a long stay. This time, they had toys like a boat, 2 jet skis, and some motorcycles. My sister and brother-in-law decided, okay, as if it was whatever, but just to be sure, my brother-in-law installed his cameras again to make sure. So, what happened was that instead of littering around, it seemed like these people really decided to become a nuisance in other ways. The boys were riding their motorcycles early in the street, revving and racing. For my sister and brother-in-law, they wouldn't be home because they work early. But my sister later found out that the elderly couple down the street tried to call the police for disturbance a few times. The thing is, Kevin and Karen knew what they were doing. They avoided my sister's house. The fact that it was the first house on the street made things easier, thinking about the cameras and that the motorcycles were cool. These idiots used their water toys on the weekends, but during the week, they did their best to be unpleasant. So if the police showed up, it was their word against whoever called. My sister said they were definitely trying. On top of the noise, during this time, my sister said these people were starting to accumulate trash. Instead of throwing it away, it began to pile up in the back. This caused other problems. In particular, a pest problem. Raccoons and possums started rummaging through, digging in the trash pile. Then the bags were torn open, and trash was thrown around. My sister said that after a while, Kevin and his wife, Karen, ended up arguing about it, and then, in a day or 2, the trash would disappear. This crap continued every month. The kids were a noisy nuisance, and the parents did their own thing. Eventually, starting in July, they began throwing parties again. The parties were loud too. Much bigger than before. My sister found out that the couple had made some local friends during their weekend getaways and had been talking trash. It seemed like the couple had gotten close to the rudest snobs in town. Also known as white trash chic, and wow, they were all very trashy. Overall, these parties caused the police to be called about 5 times. In the first cases, they received a warning. Then, they started getting fines, but these people just didn't care. No underage drinking was ever found, but it was simply unbelievable. As my other sister said when they told us all this, these were people on a mission. But oh, how this went wrong. My sister said the problems with the trash got worse. Yes, they would eventually pick it up, but wow, the smell beforehand, the piles, and the type of trash changed from maybe their everyday things to party things. Old beer cans, discarded food, just rotten. Anyone who knows what that does. Then, on a bright and wonderful autumn day in early September, it happened. As my sister said, it was fun. She came home from work to see 2 patrol cars and a good-sized Forest Service truck parked outside. My sister decided, well, time to grab the popcorn, so she sat on the front porch with some tea and started to enjoy the fresh air with a show. She couldn't fully see what was going on because of the bushes and trees separating the 2 properties, but she could hear. The couple was ranting and complaining, their kids were crying. She said it kept going back and forth from sounds of, oh my God, to let me scream more. Eventually, an officer went over there. Apparently, the couple had called the police for theft and insisted that my sister and her husband were destroying things. So, since they were mentioned, he had to at least talk to my sister. The officer was kind enough to give the details. So, Kevin and Karen decided to take themselves and the kids out for a nice lunch in town, at one of the resorts. They ate, did a few things around town, and when they returned, they found the patio door busted open. Trash everywhere, and they could hear noises like someone was grunting. They piled back into the car and called the police, insisting that their neighbors had broken in. But when the police arrived, they didn't find my sister, her husband, or an overly irritated elderly couple. No, it was a huge black bear. At first, the couple refused to believe that an animal had broken in, insisting it was the hillbilly neighbors angry about how they were having such a great vacation. That's how my sister told it, although she thinks more colorful language was probably used. The officer said they called the Forest Service, and with some careful planning, including a well-placed dart, they got the bear out of there. The couple of idiots just wouldn't stop. The officer explained how they kept trying to blame my sister and her husband, saying things like, they must have brought the bear, or they used bear bait. But the officer told them that if anyone used bait for an animal, it was them. They might have gotten lucky for not getting caught with their mishandling of trash in the past, but not this time. After my sister and the officer talked for a few more moments, he left. An hour later, my brother-in-law came home and learned what had happened. She described things as if it were like watching a ship sink. An officer stayed while the group came and went several times. After a while, the officer left, and things calmed down. The next day, they were gone. My brother-in-law sneaked over to take a look. Curiosity simply got the better of him or my sister. They had covered the back door, but left all the trash. Taking a quick look through a window, he saw a lot of damage. Cabinets busted open, a sofa and a chair torn up, the fridge ripped. It seemed like Kevin and company had made a minimal attempt to clean up, but must have given up. From the looks of it, that bear had quite the day. Later, with her usual investigations, my sister discovered that these people were renting for the season, something common in my area. The real owners had no idea how their tenants were acting, as they lived in another state, not caring at all. Kevin and Karen had issues with the trash, with illegal bear baiting, because yes, folks, leaving trash that causes a dangerous wild animal to break into your home or someone else's house is a huge no-no. So, to top it off, the cabin owner is also suing for damages. Considering the fines they received that summer, in an attempt to annoy the hillbillies, it really ended up costing them more than a few dollars. This time, as my sister said, justice was served by a black bear she called Karma. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.